Paul was in Philippi, and Philippi, we have been saying, was kind of like Grand Rapids, okay? It was the first of the region of Macedonia. It was not like the biggest city. It wasn't the capital city, but it was called the first. In other words, it was one of the most influential cities. That's kind of what Grand Rapids is becoming within Michigan, is a very influential city. And so Philippi is the Grand Rapids of Macedonia, which is kind of a fun way of approaching that, okay? Now, what's going to happen is Paul, after being beaten and arrested, thrown into prison, and then released, he is now going to leave Grand Rapids, because who wants to hang around at that point, especially when the mayor says, okay, you can go, you're free out of jail, but get out of town. We don't want you around here. So Paul's going to leave Grand Rapids, a.k.a. Philippi, and he's going to go to a little town called Thessalonica, but he's going to make a few stops along the way a little bit. Here's how it reads in verse 1. So after he had left Philippi, verse 1, then this would be Paul and Silas and anybody who might be traveling with them, not Luke. Luke is staying behind in Philippi. So Paul, Silas, and some others, traveled through Amphipolis and Apollonia and came to Thessalonica, where there was a Jewish synagogue. So essentially what's happening is Paul leaves Grand Rapids, starts to go over toward Granville, but doesn't really find anything happening there, and decides to travel a little bit further and hits Hudsonville, goes, not here, and stops in Holland. Okay, so that's kind of where he's at now. Now Paul's in Holland. After a while, there's going to be a riot that's going to break out there. He's going to leave Holland, and he's going to end up going to Corinth, a.k.a. Kalamazoo, because we all know they need Jesus. Okay, so... So that's kind of what's going on. That's the situation here. So what happens next now is that Paul's in Thessalonica, and this is, by the way, where he's going to work with the church plant there, and they're going to get things going, and eventually he's going to write letters to them. And those letters are going to be called... Oh, you got it. 1st, 2nd Thessalonians. Yeah, absolutely what's going to be going on. So Paul stays there for a while. We know he stays at least 3 weeks, likely more. It is believed that possibly 5, but at least for sure 3, because, well, Acts tells us he was there for at least 3 weeks, because it says in verse 2, as usual, Paul went to the synagogue. He hits the Jews first, which is kind of fun. So he goes to the synagogue, and on how many Sabbath days? 3. Okay, so we know he was there at least 3 weeks now. He might have been there more. He might have waited a week before going, or might have stayed a few weeks after. But we know on 3 Sabbath days, he reasoned with them from the Scriptures. So what Paul is doing is he shows up and he starts teaching them from the Bibles. And he's from the Bible, yeah, not plural. From the Bible, from the books of the Bible that were available. It is not that he carried around a big old scroll, because that's really heavy on your pants pocket and causes you to look like you're from urban parts of Grand Rapids where your pants are sagging, and he didn't have good briefs. So therefore, he didn't do that. It's likely Thessalonica is a big enough of a city, wealthy enough of a city, that they had their own copies. Okay, so they're at the synagogue and they're opening up the scrolls and scriptures, and so Paul's able to take that and start reasoning with them, starts teaching them, starts sharing something with them, and it's very interesting what he ends up doing, because he ends up doing something I think all of us would be hard-pressed to do. He proves Jesus is the Messiah. He actually proves it using just the Old Testament. Okay, now think about that. If any of us had to have the challenge, if I were to give you a blank piece of paper and say, you got 15 minutes, prove to me Jesus is God's Son and the Messiah using only the Old Testament, how well would you do? Okay, I think a lot of us would be like, I think I'm finding a new church. This is an impossible exam. Okay, but this is what Paul does. He proves Jesus using only, because think about it. Luke is just writing after the fact, so we don't even have the Gospel of Luke yet. Matthew and Mark have written, because they wrote about maybe 4 or 5 years before Paul started doing his ministry, but that hasn't circulated extremely well yet, so those aren't necessarily available. So the only thing that really is readily available, especially at a Jewish synagogue that has nothing to care about Jesus, is going to have not any circulating stuff about Jesus, who they might consider a false Messiah at this point. They're only going to have the Old Testament. That's what they're going to have. So Paul's going to have to take that and tell them, hey, this Matthew, Mark that's circulating, this Jesus you're hearing about, he's the real deal. Let me take your Old Testament and prove it to you. And that's what he does. It says it in verse 3, explaining and showing. In fact, the Greek word there literally means to prove. It literally is a word that means demonstrating by setting evidence side by side. That's the English definition, if you will, of that word, is demonstrating by placing evidence side by side. So what Paul does in this showing or proving is he takes the Old Testament, takes Jesus, puts them side by side and says, see, it lines up. Isn't that a trick? Okay, so he proves, showing that the Messiah had to suffer, rise from the dead. This Jesus I am proclaiming to you, he says. We don't get the whole speech, which is a bummer. Man, I would have loved that. And it's God's wisdom to not let us have that. Why? Because I'm telling you, when you have to do the research and learn something for yourself, you get it better. You get it better. So God wants us to do the research. Or at least someone who doesn't have a life to do the research so that we can all profit from it, which we're going to get today. Okay, we're going to get that today. It's going to be a lot of fun. So Paul ends up saying this, Jesus, I am proclaiming to you, is the Messiah. And he ends up really persuading people. This is kind of cool. We'll look at verse 4 in more detail a little bit later. But for today and right now, then some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, including a great number of God-fearing Greeks, which is cool because now it's already a diverse, multicultural church that's going to start. You got Jews and Greeks going on now, and as well as a number of the leading or elite women. This is exciting because that means that now Paul has the makings for planting a church. Because who was it that made the last church plant possible? A woman named Lydia who dealt with purple linens. It seems like here's what's cool. Ever since Paul hits Macedonia, dominantly, the ones that are the most influential and pivotal for the existence of the church plants have been women. It's going to be that way for the rest of his Macedonian life here in his ministry in Macedonia. It's going to continue on through Acts 17 and even into Corinth and going on into Acts 18. It's what's going to be the case. It's going to be a dominant recurring theme. And it's going to be interesting because what's going to happen is Paul's going to see that it's going to become this big movement, that it's going to be a women-dominant, women-led type movement, and that Paul's going to have to be extra specific when it comes to leadership because God is a God of order. He believes in equality. He believes in unity. He made men and women equal and unified, but that unity is with diversity, not uniformity. So Paul's going to have to hammer that out later. That's where we get stuff like 1 Timothy and Titus and the instructions about the roles of men and women in the church. That becomes necessary because of how much women leadership is going, that Paul's like, okay, this is awesome. This is great. Now we need to take this, harness the energy, and point it in the right direction. And so he's going to be doing that later. So we get to see the need for that from his Macedonian ministry. So there, it gives you a little snapshot of what's all happening and what's taking place. But what's interesting is this issue that Paul proves Jesus. And this is just so fascinating. So what I wanted to do is just kind of take a moment and try to work with this a little bit with us, to try to help us all get to that place where we could be able to leave here today and be able to talk to anyone, even Jewish people, take the Old Testament and prove Jesus. Doesn't that sound like a great challenge? Anybody up for that challenge? You would love to have that type of ability, to be able to leave here, break into, okay, good. We're like 98% on board, and the other two are just going to have to be convicted. So it's going to be a lot of fun. But here's what I want to start with, though, and that is, and this is, there's a big battle. It has been a battle ever since about 1910, this battle between Jesus being human and Jesus being God. And here, the battle is like a pendulum that keeps swinging from one side to another side. And the way this pendulum swings is that it goes from emphasizing Jesus as a human or emphasizing Jesus as a God, but in detriment to both. Okay, in detriment to both. In other words, the ones that pendulum swing to push Jesus as human get the humanity part right, but then they ignore the God part. And then it swings the other way. Jesus is God, but then they lose the human part. And what they tend to say is something along the lines of, well, Jesus came in the form of human, or disguised as a human, or looking like a human, but was not really human. Jesus was about as much human, they would say, as Clark Kent is human. And so think about that. It's usually, I call it Clark Kent Superman theology, because what happens with Superman is, though he's dressed like Clark Kent. You guys know Superman, Clark Kent, right? Okay. Apparently Batman can get the best of him, but besides that, you got Clark Kent is really Superman. And what happens with this is Superman is indestructible, invincible, X-ray eyes, shoots laser out of his eyes, can faster than a speeding locomotive, can stop a bullet, jump higher than the tallest building because he flies. Okay, so that's Superman. But then you put on a pair of glasses and a shirt and button-up shirt. He's Clark Kent, reporter. But if somebody were to shoot Clark Kent, what happens? It's not going to work. You can't kill Superman by killing Clark Kent. Okay, it's not going to work. You're going to have to kill Clark Kent like you would Superman, which means you need kryptonite and lots of it. Okay, that's what you're going to need. Because deep down inside, Clark Kent is not human. Clark Kent is Kryptonian. Okay, and that's how some people have viewed Jesus, is that God is really in the form of human, disguised as a human, but really isn't necessarily human no more than Clark Kent is. And that's wrong. That's wrong. So what I want to do, because that belief is what came out of the 1960s and 1970s, a very strong emphasis on the divinity of Jesus, but at the lack and loss of the humanity of Jesus, I want to cover that first, really just real quick, real quick, to look at Jesus is absolutely 100% completely down to bloods and liver human, to the point that when he hangs around with fishermen for over 3 years, he likely played the game pull my finger, because that's what fishermen do. Okay, Jesus was human. Think of Jesus and the disciples as Duck Dynasty, not this little holy thou art, I'm a walking stained glass window. Okay, that's not what it was. They were human, and they laughed, and they had jokes. Jesus passed gas. Why? Because he ate fish, and that's what's going to happen when you eat fish. Okay, and I don't want to be crude or crass. I'm just showing you Jesus is human. People go, God did not break wind. God broke wind. Okay, because he's human. So Jesus was human. So we just have to wrap our brain around that. And I can tell some of you are like, this is offensive. Don't you talk about my Jesus like that. I'm talking about Jesus because he's human. Okay, so we just have to wrap our brain around that for a moment, that he was a human being. If you had a human being that never broke wind, would they be a human? There'd be something wrong with them. Okay, so Jesus was a human being. I can prove it to you. He was born of a woman. That's a human thing to do. He had to develop and grow, just like any other child had to develop and grow. That's a human thing to do. Here's a whole list of human limitations that he had. Because he was hungry, had fatigue, he experienced agony, he needed to pray, he had to learn. He was under human authority, both as a child and as an adult. He was thirsty, tempted, and he suffered. He even died. Okay, and that's a human thing to do. so you know, there's just this whole thing of list to just look at that Jesus was human. And part of the problem is we try to figure out, well, if he was human, then what did he look like? And usually when we start thinking, well, what did Jesus look like, we think of something like this. Okay, this was a painting that was done, I believe, if I remember right, in the 1930s. It's a relatively new painting. Most people look at this and they go, well, that's a classic painting. What do you mean that's only from the 1930s? Surely that came from like 400 AD when they knew what Jesus looked like back then. No, it's a relatively recent painting. And here's the thing. This is, a person who painted this was told, this is his testimony. He was told to paint the picture of a woman and then add a beard to it. Okay, so that's what we got here, metrosexual drag Jesus. That's what's happening, okay? That's what we have here, is this blonde-haired, blue-eyed, metrosexual drag Jesus, whereas a woman has the feminine features and the nose. A guy's nose doesn't look like that, especially a Jewish guy. Have you ever seen a Jewish nose? Okay, a male Jewish nose is a special thing to be proud of. That's not it, okay? And so this is what we tend to often think of. Or we think of something other kind of weird. If you go to like the costume room or to Halloween USA around October 30th in that area, did you know you could buy Jesus costumes? Yeah, you can. They look a little bit like this. And These are the Jesus costumes. Usually they come with a big, long Duck Dynasty beard down to about the navel. Maybe a ZZ Top would be proud, I don't know, with usually a crown of thorns, because apparently Jesus, who only wore the crown of thorns for a couple days out of his life, can't be identified without them. Think about that. Okay, and so this is usually the costume we get of Jesus. But here's something interesting for you about this, and that is that it was the Victorians who added the lighter hair and the blue eyes. It was the Byzantines who added the beard. Jesus didn't usually have a beard. He only had a beard at the last moments of his ministry toward the crucifixion time, because he didn't have the time to shave. We actually have lots of paintings of Jesus without a beard. That was the understanding of him. And so, but the Byzantines said, well, beard equal power. Jesus is powerful, so we need to give him a beard in everything we do. And that's where the beard came from. The long hair, usually Jews cut their hair. Long hair was not the norm. And Jesus had long hair because people think that because he was from Nazareth, he took the Nazarite vow. And in taking the Nazarite vow, then you don't cut your hair. But Jesus nowhere says he took the Nazarite vow, so therefore he would have likely kept it short. So if we were to try to say, well, what would Jesus, a Jew, so let's think of Jew, let's not think of white people or Caucasian, think Jew. What would a Jew look like without a beard and long hair? So if we were to take away the beard and then take away the long hair, we find out that Jesus is the guy that he went to the cross because he just doesn't get any respect. You know? Okay, no, but in all reality, though, here's a stained glass window of Jesus with without the beard and long hair. You know that it's Jesus because of the circle around the head and the cross. And look at the hand that's sticking up. What's in the middle of the hand? Yeah, you see the piercing, okay? Here's another painting of Jesus when a woman came to touch his garment. I mean, she had bleeding and found healing after so much bleeding. And if you look at Jesus, he has what type of hair and what type of facial hair, right? Okay, and then, of course, you have the Billy Ray Jesus. This is where he has the business in the front and party in the back. This is where you started getting the long hair Nazarene influence there, but you still don't have the beard. So this is boy band Jesus. But nonetheless, that was the common understanding of Jesus during the medieval time periods even, was that he was short hair and shaved. That's the dominant feature. But we only know from what the media is constantly throwing at us, which is a tall guy, slender, with a beard. And then actually, if you go to like Isaiah 53:2, we find out that he's homely. He doesn't look all that attractive, hence why I picked Rodney Dangerfield. Because there's a ugly man. Okay, so if Jesus, might have looked more like him than somebody else, because he wasn't an attractive man, because it wasn't about his beauty that people were to be attracted to, it's supposed to be his divinity. Okay, and so he was a homely guy, but nonetheless, that's what we struggle with, this issue of Jesus as human. Okay, we really, really struggle with that. Although now we don't live in the 1960s or 70s anymore. We live in 2016, and in 2016, the problem has now gone the other direction. People have been emphasizing Jesus' humanity at the expense of his divinity. Where now it's all talk about Jesus being the quest of the historical Jesus, the quest of the biblical Jesus, where he's all about his human side and human nature, and looking at how he humanly existed, humanly lived, humanly died, and then there were myths and legends of resurrection, and they're removing the divinity part. They're removing that he's the Son of God, that he is the King of Kings, that he is going to return, that he walked on the earth 40 days after his resurrection, showing that he was indeed flesh and blood alive, but not just in any type of flesh and blood, but in the new body of the new creation flesh and blood, something that was unique and unusual. And so a glimpse of what we would experience at our resurrection when the time comes. So we need to look a little bit at the divinity of Jesus. And it's interesting how when I sometimes take people and I set them down and I say, prove to me Jesus is human, usually they come up with a pretty good list. He was hungry, he cried, he whatever. But when I say, okay, prove to me he's God, then people start struggling. They start saying, well, so-and-so called him God. And I would respond with, well, other people call other people God doesn't mean they're right. Well, you see, this book declares that he's God. It says right here, Jesus is God. Well, cool. There's other books that declared other people God that aren't. So how do we know this is right? And on the discussions go. We find out that it's really difficult sometimes to prove that Jesus is divine. And it's a challenge. And why is it so difficult for us to wrap our heads around that? Because we've been emphasizing the humanity for the past 40 years, since the 70s to the present. That's been the push, that's been the talk, that's been the thing. Emphasizing the phrase son of man, emphasizing the humanity rather than son of God, emphasizing the divinity. Both accurate titles, both biblical titles, but both have a little spin that are given to it in our culture and context. So we need to look at Jesus being divine. And various ways to look at Jesus being divine, there are various ways to do this. One of the ways I like to use, and when we do our membership classes, and I teach at the university, I will use this other method, a method that I'm not going to be using today. And that method is where you take the attributes attributed to God and God only in the Old Testament and show Jesus having those same attributes in the New Testament, such as God being able to control weather, then Jesus controlling weather, God being able to forgive sins, Jesus forgiving sins, and on it goes. God knowing the hearts of people, and the only one that can know the heart of a person, the spirit of a person, is that person and God. And then Jesus knows what people are thinking and what's in their heart without them ever speaking. Okay, so we get that type of way of proving Jesus is God. But there's another way, the way that Paul did it, which is all about centering on the messiahship of Jesus. And by the way, academically speaking, the messiahship is the best, number one evidence of Jesus being God and being the Son of God that completely exists. The attributes attributed from God the Father onto Jesus the Son is the second best way to show that Jesus is God. But the best way is the messiahship, because that's the one thing that just expounds, makes people's heads explode. Their fuzzy little heads just go, okay, mine gone, because it's so amazing. And so what I want to do is go through this with you. And one of the best research methodologies of this is what Josh McDowell did. Josh McDowell wrote a book called More Than a Carpenter, and within the end, also Evidence That Demands a Verdict. Those two books are the best resources on the messiahship you will ever find on the planet right now. They really, really are. Other books have come out that are really good books, but they usually have in the references those two books. And so you just go to the source there on that, okay? That's some really good research there. And so what I got, I worked at it and got permission to actually display some of Josh McDowell's research. I got permission to use some of his stuff for today. Isn't that exciting? So rather than having to say, go home, read the book, I'm actually got permission to do some of this with you. And so let's have some fun, shall we? Looking forward to it? Oh, come on. It was so difficult getting it right. So you should be excited about that. I mean, we're not like we're a mega church or something. In fact, that's probably why we got the permission so easily. but nonetheless, here's what Josh McDowell does. He likened the messiahship to an address of a person's house. I love that. Think about that for a moment. How special and important is your address? Because I could go anywhere in the world and I could mail you a letter and it will usually get to you, right? I understand that with our postal system and fallen people, things can happen, but on average, usually it will get to you. Whether I mail it from Grand Rapids to Granville, Michigan, or whether I mail it from Spain to Granville, Michigan, it will eventually get to you, because your address separates you from the 6 billion other people on this planet. Ever think about that? Okay, so your address is so important, and it separates it and makes you stand out from everybody else, because you're like the only one that lives there. Okay, that's your address. I know you might say like, oh, my parents are there, oh, my kids are there, I'm not the only one. But you get the point. For your family, for that thing, that's your address. And that separates you from other people. Now, what God did in the Old Testament was give an address for the Messiah. Okay, he gave an address for the Messiah, something that separates Jesus from the billions of other people that ever walked on the face of the earth, the hundreds of billions of people, that Jesus is the unique only Son of God, the unique only Messiah. As John 3:16 said, for God so loved the world, he gave his unique only Son. Okay, and that the Old Testament has an address that points to who that is. And the way this works is that, in fact, do you know how many messianic prophecies are even in the Old Testament? Ready for this? Josh McDowell, in his research, said there was 333. Other scholars who have less of a life than him have pointed up to 366, like one for every day of the year and one for leap year. Okay, so you got what I can say with certainty, regardless of all the research that's out there, that there's over 300 messianic prophecies. Is that fair to say? Josh McDowell says 333. Someone else says 366. What we can agree on is there's over 300 prophecies. Would you like all 300 within a 5-minute period? No, you wouldn't. Okay, you want to see me do it? Thanks a lot. I'm going to give you 20. I'm just going to give you 20 of the 300, okay? Here's how this begins to work. I'm going to give you some quick references, and we're going to fly through this. It's going to be a little quick. But again, I'm going to put this all on our blog, okay? Because again, we have the rights for this, so we're going to put it on our blog site and say, here's the verses, here's the references of what all you're going to see here today. So it'll be there. So if you want to write it down, you can have carpal tunnel. Have at it. Okay, but you will get carpal tunnel because it's going to be a little bit on the quicker side here. And if I stumble over the words and stammer or say the wrong name, forgive me. I'm just going to offer that now. So it starts off that that the Messiah will come from the seed of the woman. Okay, that's from Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. And what's interesting is usually people are identified as being from the seed of whom? The man. That's the average. That they come from the man, born of so-and-so, the father of so-and-so, who begot so-and-so and so-and-so. There are occasional situations where it will say that this is the mother of so-and-so, and that's because a man had more than one wife and had children with crossover from different women. So we'll have occasionally some differences there. But predominantly, we only get one that's identified as being of the seed of the woman, and that's Jesus. Okay, so besides that, when you're looking at the Old Testament, look at the Old Testament only the seed of the woman. Okay, that means a person's going to come as a human. So that's what we can expect. It's going to be of the seed of the woman. And so Adam and Eve had several children. And we know that eventually that it says that they would become from the line of Shem. Because after Noah, what happened to all the people of the earth? They died. Okay, so that kind of limits your gene pool. It limits your family diversity. Okay, that limits things. So when Noah had his kids, it will be from the line of Shem. So it will be from the seed of the woman and from the line of Shem. That's what's going to happen. Then God gets even more specific when he says that it's going to be of the descendant of Abraham. Okay, so of all the people that were born and died and lived and born and married and had kids, it's going to be from the seed of the woman, the line of Shem, and the descendant of Abraham. Abraham had how many children? Most people only know of 2, Isaac and Ishmael, but he had 8 children, 6 others besides them too. Busy guy, considering all that happened after they were 80 years old. So busy guy. And here's what happens, that God ends up lining it down to removing 7/8 of the people of Abraham's offspring, picking only one, the line of Isaac. So be it the seed of the woman, the line of Shem, the descendant of Abraham, and the line of Isaac. Okay, so you see how this is an address starting to zero out. This is all thousands of years before Jesus was born, this is laid out. Okay, so it'd be of the line of Isaac. And then Isaac, of all his children, would become from just one, to be a descendant of Jacob, who later ends up having his name changed to Israel. He happens to have 12 sons, and God narrows it down and says, I'm going to remove 11/12 of all the children that come from the descendants of Jacob by picking only one of that, which means that he's actually eliminating 11 of the 12 tribes, picking just one, because it's going to come from the tribe of Judah. Okay, so it's going to be from the seed of the woman, the line of Shem, the descendants of Abraham, the line of Isaac, and the descendants of Jacob, and come from the tribe of Judah. And of Judah's children, it's going to come from just one. That's the family of Jesse. And then from the family of Jesse, of all the children that Jesse has, it's going to be just one. And that's going to be of the line of house of David. Okay, so this is this address that is constantly coming down closer and closer and closer. And then, even still, besides even identifying that this is the family address that's happening, this individual, this Messiah, when he's born, will also be crucified by being nailed to a tree, a practice that didn't even exist yet. The crucifixion was started by the Persians during the time of Esther, but their version of crucifixion was impaling a big old rod shoved up the one end of a person and out the other, or decapitating the head and sticking it on a pole. That was that version of it. Some of the people that came along afterwards that would love to hang people on walls, but it wasn't until the Romans that you really started getting the idea of hanging people on a tree using nails. And even they didn't do it all that often. They tend to do it by ropes that hang someone, breaking their legs so that they suffocate, but occasionally using nails. But thousands of years before all that took place, it was predicted that the Messiah would be crucified by being nailed to a tree. And by the way, even says where he will be born. Because of course you would figure, well, if God's so specific to say he's coming from this line, that's going to be of the seed of the woman, the line of Shem, the descendant of Abraham, the line of Isaac, the descendant of Jacob, the tribe of Judah, from the family of Jesse to the house of David, will be crucified and will be born. Of all the cities to be born in, a small little village about the size of, it's even smaller than Sparta. Okay, that's how big Bethlehem is. Okay, it's smaller than Sparta. Buses don't go there. Okay, taxi cabs have to use a GPS because they've never heard of it. Okay, Google goes, give me a minute, I'll find it. Okay, it's a small little village of Bethlehem, and that's where Jesus is to be born in. And then it goes on even from there, beyond what I can even put up on the screen, because you notice we're right off toward the edge now. We got other things like that the Messiah will be betrayed by a friend. Psalm 41, he will be despised, rejected, killed, and bear the sins of the world. Isaiah 53. Zechariah 11 says that Jesus will be betrayed for 30, not 29, pieces of silver, not gold, and those pieces of silver, not gold, will be thrown, not placed, onto the temple floor, not onto a table in a market. Okay, very specific. They will be betrayed, it'll be 30 pieces of silver, and they'll be thrown onto the temple floor, and that money will be used to buy a field, and that it will be used to be bury Jesus into a rich man's tomb. That's Isaiah 53:9. He will rise from the dead and he will ascend. Isaiah 25, Psalm 68. He'll be seated at the right hand of the Father. Psalm 110, verse 1, and on and on. That's, by the way, 19 prophecies so far that we've gone through. And so you might even begin to ask, well, if surely God is being so specific to give this beautiful address, even go to the point of how he's going to be betrayed, what then the number of coins are going to be used and the type of coins and how they're going to be thrown, not placed. Surely God would have told us when all of this would take place. And he absolutely did, but not in a way that would be used by Paul. So I'm not going to say that that's part of Paul's reasoning, but we know it now because it says that Jesus will do his ministry by going into the temple, which means the temple has to be standing. Okay, so for the temple to exist, the temple got destroyed when? 70 AD. Okay, so therefore, anybody that was born and did their ministry post 70 AD and claims to be the Messiah, it can't be. They don't know their Bible. Okay, so the people today claim that they're the Messiah and Jesus was a false Messiah. Well, problem. When you look over at Malachi chapter 3, verse 1, he's supposed to be able to enter the temple and do his ministry in the temple, and the temple's not standing because it's been destroyed. You aren't the Messiah. Okay, and so we have that. We know that the Messiah will be born before 70 AD. Okay, so this is what we've got. We got over 300 of these, this type of an address. Okay, this is just absolutely amazing. So let me just show you some statistics. This is what Josh McDowell did. He got some statisticians. Okay, and they got some statistics worked up, mathematics. Those of you who love mathematics, I know we got some accountants, we got some wannabe accountants, and we got some people that are repentant IRS people. That's another way of saying that they retired. And we got people that love numbers. So I wanted to make sure to get my hands on the numbers. I'm like, I want numbers because I know our people, and we like numbers, and it's okay. We gotta like numbers. I like them too. I love statistics. So check this out. The odds, okay, anybody gambling people, the odds of one person fulfilling just 8 of the prophecies, okay, the odds, the statistical probability that one person can fulfill 8 of the prophecies is 1 in 10 to the 17th power. Okay, that is 1 followed by 17 zeros. It looks like this. It's called 1 in quadrillion. Another way of wording this is statistically impossible. Okay, get that. It is statistically, technically, just about mathematically impossible. This is actually when Richard Dawkins tries to prove that God doesn't exist, he tries to come up with a formula that's about under the same number, and that convinces a lot of people, well, then God doesn't exist. Well, here's a number even bigger odds, and yet this is about Jesus being God's son and fulfilling just 8 of the prophecies. Just think about this now. For one person to fulfill 8 prophecies is statistically just about impossible. To get a word picture, to wrap our brains around this, to get an idea of what this is like, let's take the state of Texas. Okay, so if you take the state of Texas and you were to fill it side by side 2 feet deep with silver dollars, okay, the entire state of Texas from border to border, from north to south, east to west, all the silver dollars touching each other, and then you fill it on top of each other, stacking them 2 feet deep. Then you take 1 silver dollar and you mark it. And you mark it. Then you randomly throw it in somewhere into the state of Texas. You fly overhead of a plane, you toss it out the window, and it lands somewhere in the state of Texas. You then take a bulldozer and you mush them all up and you stir them all around. You then take a man from El Paso and you blindfold him, allow him the ability to walk through the state of Texas, randomly stop while blindfolded, pick up a random silver dollar. The odds of that silver dollar being the one that you marked is the same odds of one person fulfilling 8 prophecies. How many did Jesus fulfill? Over 300. Impossible. To have done that would be a miracle. It's impossible. To do that would be a miracle. It would be a divine intervention beyond human comprehension for one person to fulfill 8. Let alone 300 prophecies that were written between 400 and 1,000 years before he was ever born. This is what freaks people out. This is why it's one of the best evidences of the existence of Jesus and of God and of Jesus being the Son of God and the Messiah that exists, because of the fact that we know when Jesus was born. It is historically understood and really academically undisputed. There's a couple of nut jobs out there, but they really are not have any type of academic clout. It is an undisputed understanding that Jesus existed. And we know that all that we have seen throughout the New Testament, nothing has been able to be proven historically inaccurate. Everything has been proven true. And we know how Jesus lived. We know how he died. We got everything there. And to see that all that was recorded after 400 to 1,000 years after these prophecies were written, and Jesus fit every single bill, down to the number of coins, down to the type of coin, down to how they were thrown, not placed, down to being of that line, down to being crucified, down to everything, being betrayed and being despised, everything. We know that Jesus fulfills the 300 prophecies. Impossible. Impossible. Yet it happened. Miracle. And then the Bible says, many were persuaded. Are you? That's what it says, verse 4. And some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, including a great number of God-fearing Greeks, as well as a number of leading women. Many are persuaded. Are you persuaded? I'm convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt. I didn't even need this, but this sure was awesome. I love it. I was persuaded without it, very persuaded with it. Okay, even more so. Okay, are you persuaded? Is that persuasion evident in your life? Do you live a life that is persuaded that Jesus is the Messiah? That Jesus is the Son of God, that Jesus lived, Jesus died, Jesus resurrected, Jesus ascended, and Jesus will return. Are you indeed persuaded? And let me tell you something. Our society, American culture, longs for a Messiah. Our culture is a dominant culture, dominantly wanting a Messiah. They just don't want Jesus, and they don't know that Jesus is the answer. But they're longing for a Messiah. You can hear it in people. You can hear it in their battle cries. You can hear it even now. Think of this. How many people are thinking that, man, if Donald Trump can be president, then our society would be better and our country would be better off. Or if Hillary Clinton can be president, our society would be better off. They are the answer to the problems of our society. They are the answers that we can be able to finally fix the corruption and the problems and the difficulties. And they think that they are a type of Messiah. Or maybe because so-and-so was the first draft pick, our team can finally win because we got the star player and the Messiah for our team. Now the Lions will go to the Super Bowl because of their draft pick. Ha ha. Okay, and then people continue on. You know, Michigan, if we can just get, this guy will be the Messiah for Michigan. After all, he's a veteran. He's a businessman. He's whatever. It's exactly what our country needs or our state needs. This is exactly what, or maybe some people, they are like, if I could just get that girlfriend or get that boyfriend, they will save my life. They will be able to make my life full of happiness, joy, worth, and meaning and significance because I know that I am loved from somebody that doesn't have to love me like my parents, somebody that doesn't want to beg over my head to appreciate me, and that there I will be able to find my significance, find my meaning, because that person would then be my Messiah. You hear it in our world? With the riots, with the hashtags, with the complaints and the longing and the cry outs. If we could only get this law passed, it would be our Messiah. It would make everything right. See, our country longs for a Messiah. And every Messiah they're looking at are false messiahs, because every one of them are going to let you down at some point. They're all false messiahs, but our country longs for one. And guess what? There really is a Messiah. Someone who can actually make it better. Someone who can actually get the job done. The answer for violence is not a bigger, stronger removal of weapons and codes. The answer for violence, changed hearts. The answer the answer for racism is not merely education. You know what the answer is? Changed hearts. The answer for stopping abuse, the answer for finding healing, the answer for finding restoration is not different laws and rules and regulations. You know what the answer is going to be? Changed hearts. Who is it that changes hearts? The Messiah, Jesus. That's what he does. That is the answer. So many people are saying we need to remove our Second Amendment and remove guns. We legalize drugs. It'll lower the issue of drugs if we can legalize this practice and that practice, because the laws are being treated like a Messiah. The answer is not in a law. The answer is not an educational program. The answer is the changed hearts of people. The answer is Jesus. Change the heart, you change the nation. That's where it starts. And are we persuaded that Jesus really is the answer? That he is the way? That whatever is going on, he's the solution. He's the fix, the cure, and the restoration. How convinced are you? Let's have a word of prayer.